Hi everyone, John Davenport here from Photogrammetry.com with another Let's Edit video. This week, we're going to take a look at this photograph that I took over in Italy. It's a little bit of a long exposure. It's only about a 1 second exposure. You can see it's just long enough to start blurring the headlights and taillights of these cars. There's a bus here that's been blurred away. Uh, but I think it's a cool photo for a number of reasons, and I think it looks really good. Um, Almost to like an HDR effect where you kind of have high, like anyway, the stereotyped HDR where you have a lot of saturation and a lot of hard edges and stuff like that. So we're going to kind of go with, in that direction with this edit. But I'm going to look at a couple other things, and we're doing this in Lightroom 5, which I have just recently upgraded to. So if you have any questions about that, you can leave a comment below. So let's get started here. The first thing that you're going to notice is that, it is a little bit underexposed, especially in the foreground area. But, I didn't want to blow out the sky because I wanted to have something here, especially with the colors. Once you see, I'll close down this here. Once I drop the exposure in the basic tab, you can see there's still a lot of blues left in the sky. So it is something that I wanted to work with in the final image, and I didn't really want to blow that out with too long of an exposure here. I suppose what I could have done was taken, maybe another stop or two of a longer exposure and gotten more light trails, and then had one that was exposed to the sky and blended it all together. But that's playing Monday morning quarterback, and we don't want to do that. So anyway. Let's start here. I'm going to drop the highlights down and see how that helps bring my sky back, and it does a pretty good job there. I'm also going to increase the shadow detail, and you'll notice that that'll actually bring the foreground back. So we've already come, with just those two sliders, we've come quite a ways at opening this photo up and having a lot of range here and a lot of interest. But one thing that you'll notice is that by dropping the highlights slider and raising the shadow slider, what ended up happening is it kind of got a little like muted maybe. It's you see a little bit more, but it's a little dull. So what I'm going to actually do is I'm going to go the opposite way, and I'm going to raise the white slider just a little bit here, and I'm going to drop the black slider. And what this does, as you see me do this, is it adds a little more contrast to the image. Basically, the way that these kind of work is that the highlights and shadows sliders, when you move them around, oftentimes you'll end up losing contrast and losing detail when you try and recover those regions. But by moving the whites and the black sliders in the opposite direction of the respective slider for highlights, you would move your whites in the opposite direction, and shadows you would move your blacks in the opposite direction. You can kind of bring that contrast back in. So anyway, I like the way that this is turning out here. I am going to drop, or add a little bit more exposure, I think, here, just to the midtones, which is the exposure slider, and I'm also going to add a little bit of extra contrast here, maybe just plus 15 or so, and see how this looks. So now I think, the sky is getting a little too bright, but maybe we can play with that in a second. We might be able to bring that back. Let's just finish up the rest of this image, and then we'll kind of work on putting it all together in a final package here. The last thing I'm going to do, like I said, I wanted to go with kind of an HDR-ish style, so I'm going to really crank up the clarity slider here. Maybe like plus 60, 70, maybe we'll do 65. Nice happy middle ground here. 66, that works. And I'm also going to add a little bit of vibrance and a little bit of saturation, which will really start to pop everything out. There's a lot of color going on. It was right before Christmas time that I was over in Italy, so we have markets and Christmas lights and all sorts of good stuff happening. So I think this works really well. I'm actually going to pull back on the exposure just slightly. It was about plus 50. I'm going to go down to about plus 0.2. And I think we're in pretty good shape here. We've come quite a long way from this very dull and just generic shot from a high vantage point to this more in-your-face, highly saturated photo. Might not be your style. You might prefer something a little more subdued. And to do that, you would really just play around with these presence sliders. If you wanted something a little more subdued, you could maybe reduce the clarity slider a little bit. You wouldn't want to go negative because then it starts to get into that soft look. Although that doesn't actually look too bad doing that. Play around with stuff and see what you like. I definitely do think for this particular photo and this particular edit, I'm going to keep it, plus 60 or so, and see how that works there. Finally, you might want to come down and play around with your sharpening sliders. I'm going to do something here. Maybe leave the detail slider a little low, and then I'm only going to sharpen kind of the hard edges here of the image, just bring a little bit more sharpness in. And then finally, I'm going to come down here to my lens corrections area, which has been updated for Lightroom 5. So I'm just going to click Enable Profile Corrections, take away the chromatic aberrations. I'm going to click Constraint to Crop, which will affect this next thing that we're going to do. So Lightroom added this new little feature here called the upright align feature or whatever, and basically it looks at all the lines in your image and it decides how to best make your image appear vertically level. So you have auto, level, vertical, and full. I usually just look at auto and see what that does first. It does a pretty good job. This building here, especially if I go to off here, you can see, especially on the edges here, this building's kind of starting to see a little bit of distortion. I am using an 11mm lens here on my D7000, so it's not surprising to see that there's a little bit of distortion here on the edges or straight lines and stuff like that. So you can click on, I usually click auto first and just see how that looks, and I think it does a pretty good job. But for the sake of this video, I'll just show you what the other ones will do. So level kind of levels out your horizon a little bit. It also does a pretty good job here. This building still has a little bit of a lean to it, but the photograph appears to be a little more level because of this thing here. So we'll go back to off. You can see it's just a very slight change there. Vertical takes your vertical lines and makes them up perfectly up and down. Here, I think for the vertical one, it tends to actually lean these buildings in a little bit more than they should be. But that's just me. You can see it is a pretty big change from here to here. And then full, I have never had any success with this button. It basically does horizontal and vertical, and usually you end up with some kind of, especially if you have the constraint and crop thing checked, you end up with something like this. So anyway, I am going to go and leave it at auto, which is actually very similar to the vertical. You can see they're almost identical. The auto is just a little bit better in my opinion. So I'm going to leave it there. But again, it's very much just point and click and see what you like. You can go over to the manual distortion and play around with things like you could in previous instances of Lightroom. But I just think that these buttons here work so well that most of the time you're not going to need to go in manually. So anyway, that's about it here. The only other thing that you could really do if you wanted to go and nitpick anything is you could go in with your adjustment brush here on the buildings maybe, and maybe brighten up just a little bit. Maybe brighten up over here. The other thing that I might do, so actually, you know what, I will do this because I think it does add a little bit more to it. I'm going to brighten this up here. And then maybe I'm going to add a new one, and I'm going to come down here, and I'm just adding a little bit more shadow slider here, and I'm going to just brighten up the road just a little bit more, just to add a little bit more depth to the photo and a little bit more brightness here. I think it does help quite a bit, actually. Something like that. You know, really, you can play around with it for hours and get it perfect. But that's where I'm going to stop it now. And again, just so that we remember, here is my before image, and here is the after image. It's quite a big difference, if I do say so myself. So thank you for watching this week's Let's Edit. I will be back again next week, and I think I'm going to be looking at the radial filter tool here, which I can show you a very sneak peek here of. And basically we just, you know, have a nice little way of bringing in a lot of cool different effects. But we'll look at that more next week, so stay tuned for that. Thank you for watching. I'll see you again soon. Bye for now.